Keanu Reeves and Alexandra Grant turned a simple night out into a magical winter romance as they held hands and shared a sweet kiss on the ice. Surrounded by twinkling lights and holiday music, the couple laughed, skated, and stole quiet moments together, proving their bond is stronger than ever. Their cozy ice skating date gave fans a rare, heartwarming glimpse into their private love story. You know those winter nights when the city feels softer, like it's finally exhaling after a long day. This story begins on one of those nights, when the cold air carried the smell of roasted chestnuts, and the lights above an outdoor ice rink turned everything into a quiet, glowing dream. Keanu stood at the edge of that dream, hands deep in the pockets of his black coat, pretending he wasn't nervous. To anyone watching, he looked calm, almost invisible in the crowd, just another man in line for skate rentals. But inside, his heart was moving faster than the music floating over the ice. This was supposed to be a simple date. Just ice skating, just holding hands, just laughing. Yet the weight of every camera that might find him, of every stranger's gaze, pressed against his shoulders. He told himself it was fine, that he had been seen by millions before. But tonight felt different because tonight it wasn't just his own peace of mind on the line. It was hers too. Across the plaza, Alexandra walked toward the rink, her scarf wrapped tight against the winter air, fingers hidden in wool gloves that couldn't quite hide their small tremble. She loved winter lights, the way they blurred into soft halos when she squinted, turning the world into a painting. But the ice itself, that was another story. She had never been good at skating. The idea of falling in front of him, in front of anyone with a phone, sent a quiet rush of fear through her. Still, she kept moving forward, boots crunching over the thin crust of old snow. She could have said no when he suggested this. She could have picked a quiet restaurant or a hidden studio. Instead, she had said, "Let's do it," because she knew how rare it was for him to ask for something simple and joyful just for himself. They saw each other at almost the same time, both pausing by the entrance to the rink. For a second, the crowd seemed to blur around them, the kids tugging at their parents, the teenagers posing for photos, the older couples shuffling carefully to the benches. Alexandra smiled first, that warm, steady smile that always made things feel less complicated than they really were. Keanu's shoulders lowered a fraction, like her smile had reached in and gently pulled some invisible weight away. He walked to her, each step slow, deliberate, as if he were afraid that if he moved too fast, the moment might crack and disappear. When he reached her, he didn't say anything right away. He just leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, his lips warm against her cold skin, the kind of greeting that said more than any hello ever could. "You made it," she whispered, even though she had never doubted he would. Her voice carried that mix of teasing and tenderness he had grown to depend on. "I wouldn't miss this," he answered, trying to sound light. "Besides, I need someone to laugh at me when I fall." It was a joke, but there was truth inside it. He always tried to be the one who carried the awkwardness, who broke the tension with self-mockery before anyone else could. Humility had become both shield and habit. Alexandra heard the little crack in his voice, and her eyes softened. She reached out and took his gloved hand, not for the cameras that might be somewhere in the shadows, but for him. For the man who still worried he might be too much trouble to love in public. They moved together toward the skate rental booth, brushing shoulders with people who were half aware, half unaware of who was standing beside them. A little boy in a red hat stared up at Keanu, eyes wide, holding a pair of skates 2 sizes too big. Keanu caught the look, crouched down, and gently turned the skates around. "Try this way," he said, smiling, making sure the laces were untangled. The boy's mother opened her mouth, maybe to ask for a photo, maybe to say thank you, but he just nodded with that quiet politeness he carried everywhere and stepped aside. Alexandra watched the exchange, something warm tightening in her chest. It wasn't the fame that moved her, it was the care. The way he spoke softer to children. The way he always tried to make strangers feel less nervous about meeting him than he was about being met. At the bench, they sat side by side, trading boots for skates. The metal blades scraped lightly against the wooden planks as Keanu tried to thread the laces with cold-numbed fingers. It looked simple, but each knot felt heavier than it should. He had been through winters of silence, seasons where he thought it would be easier to stay alone, to keep his heart wrapped in work and long nights and empty hotel rooms. Letting someone close meant giving them access to all the fragile places he'd worked so hard to hide. Tonight, with holiday music drifting over the speakers and laughter echoing from the rink, he realized how badly he wanted to keep this softness, this second chance. And that terrified him. Alexandra finished tying her skates before he did and glanced down at his hands. She noticed the slight tremor in his fingers, the way he double-checked each knot like he was preparing for something far more dangerous than a patch of frozen water. "You okay?" she asked softly, tilting her head so she could catch his eyes. She could have blamed it on the cold, let it pass, but that wasn't who she was with him. Honesty had been their quiet agreement from the beginning. He hesitated, then let out a breath that misted in the air between them. "I'm actually kind of scared," he admitted, looking down at his skates with a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "I'm not exactly graceful out there, and I really don't want to drag you down with me." Humility again wrapped around a deeper fear, that he might not be enough or might be too much trouble even for something as simple as an ice rink. Her laugh came low and warm, not mocking, but full of relief. "Keanu, have you seen me on skates?" she said. "I'm a walking disaster waiting to happen. If you fall, I'll probably already be on the ground before you." The way she said it turned his fear into something lighter, something they could share instead of something he had to carry alone. She took his hand again, firmer this time. "We'll be terrible together," she added. "That's kind of the point, isn't it?" He looked up at her, really looked, and for a brief second the world narrowed to the space between their eyes. He saw his own reflection in them, smaller, gentler, less haunted than he used to see in mirrors. Maybe courage didn't always look like jumping off a building in a movie or facing down some imagined enemy. Maybe tonight, courage was stepping onto a sheet of ice with the person who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. He squeezed her hand back, as if sealing a quiet promise only the two of them would ever hear. They stood together and walked toward the entrance of the rink, metal blades clinking softly on the rubber mat. The music swelled, a familiar holiday song that had played in 100 malls and streets and movie scenes, but somehow sounded new tonight. As they reached the low gate, the temperature seemed to drop, not in the air, but in the space around them. Keanu felt it before he saw it, the sharp, staccato flicker of light coming from the far side of the rink. Flashes. Not from the string lights overhead, but from cameras. A small knot of photographers had gathered just beyond the barrier, lenses already lifted, eyes fixed on the couple about to step onto the ice. His chest tightened. In an instant, the intimacy of the night threatened to shatter into headlines and hashtags and strangers arguing about a love they didn't understand. He could feel old instincts rising, pull away, keep his head down, get her out of there as quickly and quietly as possible. Beside him, Alexandra hadn't fully registered the scene yet. She was focused on the slick, gleaming ice and the first careful step she'd have to take. He felt a rush of protectiveness, so strong it almost knocked the air from his lungs. From somewhere to his left, a small voice cut through the noise. "Mom, do you think they'll still skate?" a little girl asked, her mittened hand pressed against the rail as she watched them with wide, hopeful eyes. There was no phone in her hand, no camera, just simple, open curiosity. Keanu swallowed, the question hanging in the air like a challenge and an invitation at the same time. He looked at Alexandra, at the shimmer of nerves in her smile, at the trust in the way she held onto his arm. His free hand curled into a fist inside his glove, then slowly relaxed. Whatever he chose in the next few seconds would define this night. Would he retreat back into safety, away from the lights, away from the risk of being seen too closely? Or would he step forward, onto the ice, and into the very life he kept telling himself he didn't deserve? With the cameras flashing, the crowd watching, and Alexandra's fingers tightening gently around his, he drew in a long breath that seemed to gather years of fear and loneliness into it, then made his choice. He stepped forward before his courage could change its mind. The rubber mat ended, the sharp, glassy edge of the ice waiting like a dare. Keanu tightened his grip on Alexandra's hand, not enough to hurt, but enough to say, "I'm here, I'm not letting go." The first touch of blade against ice sent a shiver up his legs, that strange floating feeling between slipping and standing. Around them, skaters looped and laughed, carving messy figure eights into the frozen surface. The music swelled again, and for a moment, if he didn't look toward the flashes, he could almost believe they were just two more faces in the crowd. Alexandra's first step onto the rink was less graceful and more survival, her ankle wobbling, the world tilting as her center of gravity fought to remember itself. Instinctively, she clutched at his arm with both hands, pressing closer than she normally would in public. Her heart hammered loud enough that she half expected it to echo off the boards. "Okay," she breathed, mostly to herself. "Okay, one step, then another." She focused on the sound of the blade scratching the ice, the chill on her cheeks, the comforting warmth of his shoulder against hers. Little by little, her mind loosened its grip on the fear of falling and tightened around the simple fact that she wasn't alone out here. They shuffled forward together, awkward, imperfect, almost comically unsteady. Keanu's usual fluid movements were gone, replaced by this carefully clumsy glide that made him more human than any movie ever could. He laughed once, the sound low and surprised, when they nearly tipped over at the same time and somehow kept each other upright. "See," he murmured, breath misting near her ear. "We're already terrible, it's perfect." She laughed too, the sound breaking through her tension like sunlight through clouds. For a few precious seconds, the cameras, the crowd, the entire weight of their shared visibility faded to the edges of the frame. But the flashes were still there, sharp and insistent at the edge of his vision. From the far side of the rink, a photographer lifted his camera higher, angling for a better shot. Another leaned over the barrier, called his name, then hers, voices slicing through the music. Keanu tried to keep his eyes straight ahead, tried to let the noise roll past. He knew this game. He had played it for years. Pretend you don't hear, pretend you don't care. Protect the moment, protect the person beside you. He told himself he could handle it, that the cost was worth the small miracle of skating with someone he loved on a winter night. Then one voice pushed too far. "Hey, Keanu," a man shouted from behind the rail, camera already lifted. "Give us something romantic, kiss her, let's see it. Or are you two just pretending tonight?" There was a cruel edge to the tone, that mocking curiosity that didn't care about the people in the middle of the story, only the picture it could sell. A couple of others snickered, lenses firing in rapid bursts. The words hit the ice like a crack, thin but deep, spreading quickly. Alexandra's spine stiffened. The shiver that went through her had nothing to do with the cold. For years, she had lived her life outside the bright center of fame, in studios and quiet rooms and spaces where art breathed but rarely shouted. Being with him had changed that. Suddenly her face, her hair, her age, her clothes, things that had once been background details in her own life, became targets. Judged, debated, magnified. She had prepared herself the best she could, but nothing really prepares you for strangers asking if you're good enough for the person you love. Hearing that taunting tone now, in what was supposed to be their fragile pocket of peace, pierced something tender inside her. Her blade caught on a shallow groove in the ice. For a moment the world lurched, light and sound spinning as her balance disappeared. Keanu reacted before he even processed what was happening, his body moving on instinct. He pulled her toward him, free hand finding her waist, the two of them teetering on the edge between impact and recovery. Their skates screeched against the ice, his knee bending at an odd angle as he absorbed most of the momentum. Somehow, miraculously, they stayed upright. A ripple went through the nearby skaters, a collective gasp, then a thin scatter of applause from people who thought it was all part of some sweet, clumsy show. But Alexandra wasn't applauding. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow, as if the fall she'd avoided had landed inside instead. Humiliation and anger tangled in her throat. She hated that one stranger's voice could still do this to her. Hated that instead of simply being a woman trying to stand on skates, she had become a symbol, a headline, a debate. Her eyes burned, and she blinked hard, determined not to let tears freeze on her lashes where everyone could see them. "You okay?" Keanu whispered, his forehead nearly touching hers. His eyes searched her face, and she could see he wasn't asking about the almost fall. He was asking something far bigger. "Are you okay in this life with me?" She swallowed, tried to nod, then realized she couldn't quite lie to him. Not about this. "I need a second," she managed, voice tight but controlled. She gently slipped her hands from his arm, fingers trailing over his sleeve like they didn't really want to let go. Just a minute, okay?" Before he could answer, before he could insist on following her, she turned and began edging her way toward the side of the rink, hands brushing the rail, movements small and careful. He watched her go, torn in two. Every instinct screamed at him to skate after her, to shield her from the cameras with his own body, to pull her back into the fragile bubble they'd tried to build on the ice. But another voice, quieter and wiser, reminded him of all the times he'd needed space, needed to step away and breathe without someone tugging at his sleeve. So he stayed where he was, standing alone in the center of the rink as people flowed around him, flashes popping at the edges like tiny, distant storms. The music changed, a softer song rising overhead. Under the glare of the lights, with strangers watching and cameras clicking, Keanu turned slowly on his blades, eyes locked on the place where Alexandra had stopped, one hand braced against the barrier, her shoulders drawn in tight. Between them lay a strip of glinting ice and a silent question that pressed heavier than any spotlight. Was tonight the moment this fragile happiness began to break, or the moment they finally learned how to hold it together in the open? The cold bit harder as he moved toward her, every small push of his skates feeling like a decision he couldn't undo. Keanu kept his gaze low at first, watching the lines scratched into the ice by hundreds of other uncertain feet. There was something strangely comforting about those marks, proof that falling, stumbling, wobbling, it was all part of the story written on this rink. By the time he reached the edge, Alexandra had her back turned slightly away from the photographers, face tilted down, fingers pressed white-knuckled against the rail. He slid up beside her and didn't say anything right away. Silence, he'd learned, could sometimes be kinder than questions. He just rested one hand lightly on the boards near hers, close enough that if she wanted to, she could cover it. Close enough to say, "I'm here, but I'm not going to push." A family skated by, a little girl clinging to a plastic penguin, giggling as she nearly toppled over. Alexandra watched them for a few seconds, her breath slowing, her shoulders gradually lowering from around her ears. "They don't stop," she finally murmured, eyes still on the ice. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the fatigue woven into it. "It doesn't matter what we do or how quiet we try to be, they just keep coming." She glanced toward the cluster of cameras at the far side. One lens immediately twitched in their direction, hungry. She looked away again, jaw tightening. "I know," he said softly, the words heavier than they sounded. "And I'm sorry." He hesitated, searching for something truer than an apology, something that didn't pretend he could fix a world that had never learned how to look gently. "I should have asked if you wanted to do this out here, like this. I wanted normal, and I didn't think about how unfair that is for you. Normal for me comes with all of that." He motioned with his chin toward the flashes, a sad, wry smile flickering and then fading. She let out a breath that misted and disappeared between them. "It's not your fault," she said, and meant it. "I knew what I was walking into. I said yes." Her fingers finally loosened their grip on the rail. Still, she didn't look at him yet. "But sometimes I worry that being with you means losing pieces of myself I never agreed to give away. My privacy, my quiet, my right to be ordinary." The last word came out soft, almost embarrassed, as if wanting a simple life were something to apologize for. He swallowed, the ache of recognition sharp. "I get that," he murmured, "more than you know." His gaze drifted over the rink, then back to her profile, the curve of her cheek, the determined line of her mouth. "There were years when I thought the safest thing for everyone was if I just stayed alone, less collateral damage that way, no one dragged into the mess with me." He laughed once, humorless and gentle at the same time. "But then I met this artist who talked about light and shadow like they were old friends, and who somehow made me feel like I didn't have to disappear into mine." Her lips twitched, fighting a smile. "She sounds dramatic," Alexandra said, finally letting her eyes flick to his. "She is," he replied, a small chuckle warming the space between them. "But she's also the bravest person I know." The way he said it, without irony, almost made her look away again. He leaned slightly closer. "We can leave, you know, right now. We can walk off this ice, disappear down some side street, go home. No more cameras, no more questions tonight, just us. I'll follow your lead." The offer hung in the air, a door out wide open. Part of her wanted to run through it, to feel the solid pavement under her feet, to close the door on the eyes, the noise, the sting of that mocking voice. But another part of her, the part that had stood up after every rejection letter, every harsh review, every dismissive glance, pushed back. If they left now, would they be choosing peace or letting fear write the ending of this night? Before she could answer, a sharp cry split the air nearby. Both of them turned instinctively. A teenage boy had lost control coming out of a turn, his skates shooting out from under him. He slammed into the side rail a few feet away, momentum carrying him sideways toward the open gap where skaters entered and exited. The gate wasn't fully closed. The boy's body was sliding straight toward it, toward the hard corner of the barrier and a tangle of unsteady legs. Without thinking, Keanu pushed off the ice. The move wasn't graceful. It was wild, urgent, all heart and no finesse. His blade bit into a rough patch, his balance teetering, but he pushed harder. Alexandra's fingers snatched air where his arm had just been, her breath catching as he shot forward. People nearby gasped, scooting back, the scene unfolding too fast and too close. He reached the boy just as he hit the open gap. Keanu dropped low, arms stretching out, one hand catching the boy's jacket, the other bracing against the rail. The impact jolted through his body like a shockwave. His knee twisted sharply, pain stabbing hot and sudden up his leg. For a split second, both of them hung between falling and holding, the world narrowing to the sound of skates scraping and a choked-out "Whoa!" from the teenager. Then gravity won. Keanu's feet flew out from under him. He twisted as he went down, trying to shield the boy from the worst of the fall. His shoulder and hip slammed hard against the ice, the cold slicing through his coat with brutal clarity. The boy landed partially on top of him, then rolled away, dazed but mostly unhurt. Around them, the rink seemed to freeze, the music suddenly too bright, too cheerful against the sharp silence. Flashes exploded in a frantic staccato, every camera at the rail firing like a small storm had broken loose. Voices rose, some calling his name, others shouting instructions. The teenager's friends skated over, faces pale, reaching for him. "Dude, are you okay, sir? I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." The boy's apology tumbled out in a rush, breathless and scared. Keanu tried to answer, but the pain in his knee flared when he shifted, stealing his words. His jaw clenched, eyes squeezing shut for a moment as he fought down a groan. He had fallen on hard floors and stunt pads 1,000 times before, but this felt different, sharper, less choreographed. He realized with a strange clarity that this wasn't a scene he could redo or a take he could call cut on. This was just life, messy and unedited. "Keanu," Alexandra's voice cut through the noise like a lifeline. She stumbled across the ice toward him, nearly tripping in her haste. Kneeling down was almost impossible in skates, but she forced her legs to bend anyway, one hand landing gently on his shoulder, the other hovering near his face as if afraid she might brush against something broken. Her eyes were wide, bright with fear and something fiercer that he couldn't quite name. He looked up at her, trying to pull in a steady breath despite the throbbing in his leg. The faces above him blurred at the edges, strangers, staff, curious skaters, and just beyond them, a jagged line of cameras still clicking. For a second, all the old doubts roared back. Maybe he really was a magnet for trouble. Maybe being close to him would always mean nights like this, beautiful until they suddenly weren't, a single moment away from turning into something painful and public. His hand reached blindly for hers, fingers finding and curling around them with a tightness that betrayed more than physical pain. The world tilted slightly, sound coming in jagged bursts. The teenager's panicked apology, the rustle of thick jackets, the distant, relentless clicks of shutters. Alexandra squeezed back, grounding him, her expression taut with worry. As rink staff began to hurry toward them with a small, battered first aid kit and concerned faces, a new question settled, heavy and unspoken, between them on the cold, unforgiving ice. If this was the cost of being ordinary together, even on a simple winter night, how much more were they willing to risk for a love that refused to stay hidden? They helped him to the bench like he was made of something fragile, hands under his arms, another steadying his back. Pride told him to wave them off, to insist he was fine, to pretend the stabbing in his knee was just another bruise he'd walk off in the morning. But age and honesty whispered louder, "Protect what you have left." So he let them guide him, gritting his teeth as each shift of weight sent a fresh flare of pain radiating through his leg. Alexandra moved with them, one hand never leaving his shoulder, as if afraid he might vanish if she let go. Her skates clicked nervously against the rubber mat, breath shallow and fast. Once he was seated, the rink attendant crouched in front of him, gently prodding around the swelling joint. "Does this hurt?" the young woman asked, pressing lightly above the kneecap. He forced a casual shrug that didn't reach his eyes. "Only when I breathe," he managed, lips twitching upward. The attendant snorted despite herself, shaking her head. "That's not nothing," Alexandra murmured, her voice quiet but firm. She hovered just to his side, watching the attendant's hands with a tense focus. The guilt was a living thing inside her now, coiled tight and restless. If she hadn't needed space, if they'd left when he offered, he never would have been in that position. "You didn't have to jump in like that," she added, softer. "Someone else would have helped." He turned his head to look at her, pain and affection swimming together in his gaze. "I know," he said, "but I was there." as if that alone explained everything. And in a way, for him, it did. Being there had always meant stepping in, absorbing impact, turning himself into a shield. It wasn't something he could switch off, no matter how many times it cost him. A hot wave of frustration rose in her, not at him, but at the universe that seemed determined to test his body, his heart, his spirit over and over. "You can't keep breaking yourself to save everyone," she whispered. "Not anymore, not after everything." Her throat tightened, a flash of memories crossing her mind, old losses, old griefs he rarely spoke of yet carried in the silence between his words. He studied her face, the crease between her brows, the way her jaw clenched when she was trying not to cry. "Look at me," he said gently. When she finally did, he offered a small, stubborn smile. "I'm not broken, just dented, temporarily." He paused, then added more quietly, "I've been through worse, you know that." His tone wasn't dismissive, it was simple, almost matter-of-fact. A man who had lived through storms measured this moment and found it painful, yes, but survivable. From near the rail, the teenage boy approached, helmet under one arm, his face flushed and anxious. "Sir, I'm really sorry," he blurted, words tumbling over each other. "I wasn't paying attention, and I could have really hurt someone. You, that little girl by the gate, I just thank you. I didn't know what to do." His hands shook slightly as he held out a paper cup of steaming hot chocolate. The lid trembled, threatening to spill. Keanu's expression softened. He reached out carefully, accepting the cup with both hands. "Hey," he said, his voice low but steady. "You're okay, that's what matters." He nodded toward the ice. "You're going to fall sometimes. Just try not to take out half the rink with you next time, yeah." The boy laughed weakly, relief flooding his features. I'll work on that," the teenager said. He hesitated, then added, "My mom's in the stands. She saw everything. She wanted to come say thank you, but she didn't want to make a scene." He looked down at the ice, then back up. "I'll tell her you're okay. Tell her I'm a terrible skater and this was bound to happen sooner or later," Keanu replied, the corners of his eyes crinkling. The boy nodded, eyes shining, and backed away, nearly tripping over his own blades in his hurry. As he left, a small figure edged closer, the same little girl from earlier, the one who'd asked if they would still skate. She clutched a penguin support in front of her, cheeks rosy from the cold. "Are you hurt a lot?" she asked bluntly, child serious, looking up at him with huge, searching eyes. The question caught him off guard. He exchanged a brief glance with Alexandra, then looked back at the girl. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not all the time." He thought for a moment, wanting to answer her honestly without scaring her. "The good thing is, I'm really good at getting back up." The girl considered this like it was a new piece of important data. "My dad says that too," she said. "He fell off a ladder fixing the lights. He said the trick is you gotta laugh and then try again." She frowned. "But he cried when he thought we didn't see." Her confession was small, raw, the kind that slips out only when you trust someone without knowing why. Something in his chest tightened. "Sometimes grown-ups cry quietly," Keanu said softly. "It doesn't mean they're not brave, it just means they care about what they almost lost." His eyes flicked briefly to Alexandra, then back to the girl. "Tell your dad he's doing okay, yeah? And tell him the lights look great." The girl nodded solemnly, as if he'd just given her a mission, then shuffled back toward the ice. Alexandra watched him, her heart aching at the ease with which he turned his own pain into comfort for others. When they were alone again, she sat down beside him, the bench creaking under their combined weight. "You know," she said quietly, "you're allowed to be the one who's helped. You don't always have to be the strong one, not with me." He let that sink in, eyes fixed on the rink where new skaters were already filling the space their fall had occupied minutes before. "I don't always know how," he confessed. "For a long time, needing people meant losing them, so I got used to empty rooms." He turned his head toward her, the vulnerability in his gaze unguarded. "But I'm trying. With you, I'm trying." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. The warmth of his palm against hers sent a quiet steadiness through her. "Trying is enough," she said. "Trying is everything." Her voice lowered, barely more than a whisper. "But I need you to protect your heart and your body as fiercely as you protect everyone else, because I'm not strong enough to watch you keep throwing yourself into every fire." He looked down at their joined hands, then at his swollen knee. The attendant had wrapped it snugly, the fabric already stretching slightly as the joint puffed beneath it. "So what do we do now?" he asked, the question encompassing more than a single night. "Call it go home." The thought of leaving twisted something in her. Part of her wanted to say yes. To take him home, put ice on his knee, make tea, cocoon themselves in the kind of quiet that needed no explanations. But another part, the stubborn, scarred part that had weathered years of doubt, rebelled. If they left now, would this night always be remembered as the one where fear and injury won? She stared at the rink, the loop of lights above reflecting in the ice like a sky turned upside down. "You can't skate on that," she said at last, nodding toward his leg. "It would be insane." He opened his mouth to agree, ready to yield to common sense, to accept the gentler ending. But then she added, "So if we go back out there, we do it my way." He blinked, surprised. She turned to face him fully, eyes fierce now, the earlier fear alchemized into something steadier. "Slow, careful, for us, not for them." Her chin tipped slightly toward the cameras. "We don't give them a performance, we give ourselves a memory we're not afraid of." He studied her, the quiet strength in her posture, the way her fear had not vanished but been harnessed. "You're serious?" he asked. "Dead serious," she replied. A hint of a smile ghosted over her lips. "You said you're good at getting back up, prove it, but this time you let me be the one keeping you steady." The idea stirred both hope and terror inside him. The rational part of his brain shouted objections, injury, humiliation, the risk of another fall. But beneath all of that, a different truth pulsed. He was tired of running away, tired of letting fear decide when joy was allowed to end. He exhaled slowly, nodding once. "Okay," he said, "okay." Then more quietly, "If you're with me." She squeezed his hand, an anchor in the chaos of his thoughts. "Always," she answered. As he braced his hands against the bench to stand, the pain in his knee flared so sharply he had to pause, swallowing against the sting. The rink attendant hovered. "Sir, maybe you should." He gave her a small, grateful smile. "I hear you," he said. "Really, I'll be careful." He shifted his weight, testing his leg. It protested but didn't buckle. It would be a limp, not a stride, imperfect but possible. With Alexandra on one side and the low rail on the other, he inched slowly toward the rink entrance, every step a quiet act of defiance against the part of him that wanted to sit and stay small. As they reached the gate, the murmurs around them grew. Some people lifted their phones again. Others just watched with something like respect. Alexandra felt their eyes, felt her own fear humming under her skin, but she didn't slow. At the edge of the ice, she turned to him, her fingers wrapped firmly around his arm. "One lap," she said. "No heroics, no rushing, just us moving forward. Deal." He looked out over the frozen surface, then back at her. Memories of every lonely winter, every quiet night he'd spent convincing himself this kind of ordinary joy wasn't meant for him, flickered through his mind. He swallowed hard, emotion pricking unexpectedly behind his eyes. "Deal," he whispered. They stepped toward the ice together, his injured knee trembling, her heart racing, both of them hovering on the thin line between fear and courage. And with the entire rink watching to see if they would actually go through with it. The first contact of blade on ice felt different this time, heavier with meaning. Keanu tightened his core, holding his weight back, wary of the traitorous knee. It twinged immediately, a sharp reminder that this choice came with a cost. But Alexandra's hand on his arm was steady, her presence a counterweight to the pain. They moved forward in inches, not strides, the gliding rhythm of earlier replaced with tiny, careful pushes. Around them, skaters parted instinctively, opening a path without anyone needing to ask. Some slowed to match their pace at a distance, as if unwilling to break the fragile spell forming around the couple on the ice. The cameras were still there, but something had shifted in the air. The spectacle had softened, curiosity tangled with a hushed kind of respect. People weren't just trying to capture a moment anymore. They were witnessing two people decide in real time not to let fear dictate their story. Alexandra focused on her breathing, on the feel of the cold seeping through her coat, on the firm muscle of his arm beneath her fingers. "You know," she said quietly, more to keep herself grounded than to make conversation. "The first time I showed my work in a gallery, I stood in the bathroom for 20 minutes, trying to decide if I should sneak out the back door." He glanced at her, surprised. "You never told me that." She shrugged slightly, eyes on the ice. "I'd spent years creating those pieces, pouring myself into them. But the second they were on those white walls, under those bright lights, I felt exposed, like people weren't just looking at the art. They were looking at me, judging, measuring." She swallowed, the memory still sharp. I almost left. I almost decided I'd rather keep my work hidden than risk it being misunderstood. But you didn't, he said, gently steering them around a shallow curve. No, she agreed, a faint smile touching her lips. A friend found me, told me that courage isn't about being unafraid of what people think. It's about choosing to stand beside your own work even when you're terrified. She glanced up at him. Tonight feels like that, except the work is us. The truth of that settled between them, fragile and real. I've spent a lot of years hiding in plain sight, he admitted. Smile for the cameras, say the right words, do the job, then disappear as soon as the lights go off. It's safer that way. Nobody gets close enough to see the cracks. A small, raw laugh escaped her. Too late for that, she murmured. I've seen the cracks. And you stayed, he said, wonder flickering through his features. And I stayed, she echoed, because the cracks are where the light gets in and where it comes out. Her voice softened. I don't want a perfect life, Keanu. I want a true one, even if it means limping around an ice rink in front of half the city. He chuckled, the sound edged with relief. With each careful push, his knee protested a little less violently, as if resigning itself to the plan. They moved in a slow arc around the rink, the towering Christmas tree glowing in their peripheral vision, its ornaments catching the light like small captured suns. Snow began to drift lazily from the dark sky, tiny flakes swirling through the beams of the floodlights, softening every edge. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to really look at her. Not just the outline at his side, but the woman herself, the silver in her hair catching the light, the faint laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, the steady determination that had carried her through years of creating art long before anyone put her name in print. He thought of all the times he'd watched her work, lost in color and form, and how it had made him feel like maybe there was still beauty to be made from broken things. You know what scares me the most, he said quietly, eyes on the path ahead. It's not the cameras or the falls, it's that some part of me still thinks I don't deserve this. He gestured vaguely at the night around them. This simple happiness, holding your hand, laughing on a stupid ice rink. Every time something goes wrong, there's this voice that says, see, you were right, it was never meant for you. Her grip on his arm tightened, an almost imperceptible shake in her breath. That voice lies, she said firmly. It's built from every loss and every headline and every lonely hotel room. It's loud because you've fed it for a long time, but it's not telling you the truth. She turned, forcing him to meet her eyes. You are kind, you are humble, you show up for people who will never know your name. If anyone has earned the right to ordinary joy, it's you. Snow landed on his lashes, melting into the corners of his eyes. He blinked it away, but his vision stayed wet. Emotion edged his features, unhidden now. What about you? He asked, his voice rough. What do you think you deserve? She exhaled slowly, considering. For years, she'd accepted the background, the woman behind the curtain, the one who supported, who created quietly, who let others stand in the spotlight. I think, she said at last, I deserve to be seen clearly, not as an accessory, not as a surprise, just as myself, and loved that way, with all my strange ideas and gray hair and fears. She paused, then smiled gently. You do that for me, that's why I'm still here. They moved past the big tree, its lights reflecting off the ice in fractured patterns. The announcer's voice crackled over the speakers, cheerful but apologetic. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be closing the rink in 10 minutes. Please begin making your way to the exits. A soft murmur swept through the crowd. Some people skated toward the gate immediately. Others lingered, milking the last few loops of the night. Keanu and Alexandra kept their slow pace, neither rushing nor dragging their feet, existing in a rhythm entirely their own.